All right, Kate Arndt.
Yes.
We're going to try that again. This is the part where you respond to someone when they say your name.
Hi.
All right, so Kate Arndt.
Yes. Do you want me to...
I asked you to bring in a receipt from one of your recent purchases. Where did you go?
I went to Target.
Okay. And what did you get from Target?
Well, a couple of items. It's definitely one of those typical Target trips where you go in for one thing and come out with a cart full.
That's how Target works. What did you get?
I went in for a battery and came out with a battery, a lock, dry shampoo, a workout top, a top to go on a first date tomorrow.
Wow. Okay. Give me your line. How much do these items cost?
All right. The battery was $7, as was the lock. Dry shampoo was $10. The top I'm wearing on the date was on sale for $10. The workout top was $16. And then, I bought the dress I'm wearing right now, actually, and it was $40, which is a bit of a splurge. It wasn't even on sale, but for a work dress, that's a bargain.
So all in all, how much did you spend?
It came out to $99.
Oh my God. So you walked in needing to buy one $7 battery and walked out having spent over almost $100?
That's right.
Oh, the people at Target must love you when they see you coming in.
I was also on a journey on a quest to hit my step goal for the day, so I had to do a couple laps.
So you hit your step goal and your money goal all in one day. So if you went back to Target 1 year from today, all of those things could cost you from $107 to $110, a lot more than what you paid originally. Would that change the way you shop?
Ideally, I want to make it out of Target under $100. So seeing that total of $115 or $120 would have me reevaluating some of those clothing items when I get home.
Inflation is something that is on everyone's mind nowadays. Lots of people know what it is, but they don't know what it is. Hi, I'm Chris Wakefield.
And I'm Kate Arndt.
And on this show, we're going to explore what makes our economy tick. We'll interview the experts, learn about how economic changes can impact you at home and Kate at Target, and we'll find a way to make it make sense. Episode 1, Inflation.
This podcast is brought to you by Bedel Financial Consulting. Founded in 1989, our client-first approach is built on transparency and trust. No commissions, no products, no conflicts of interest. Just confidence and peace of mind. Trust Bedel.
To understand how inflation works, we first have to understand how inflation is calculated.
Hi, my name is Dave Crossman. I'm a senior portfolio manager at Bedel.
When I sat down with Dave, I started by asking him one simple question. What is inflation?
So inflation is basically an increase in the price of goods and services over time.
An increase in the price of goods and services over time. When I was in school, Kate, the simple explanation for inflation was when the government printed too much money, right?
I've heard that before.
Okay. But Dave says that is just one of the few things that can cause inflation.
There can be a number of causes. I mean, that's certainly one of them. You can also have supply shocks. If you go back to the 70s in the U.S., the Arab oil embargo, that caused the price of gas and oil to spike.
Kate?
I'm scared.
What was the 70s oil embargo?
I did not come prepared for this conversation.
America is 80 million gallons of oil a day short now that the Arabs have turned off the tap. There is no way that she can make up the loss.
Well, so it was, I believe, the Yom Kippur War in 73, and the U.S. supplied Israel with weapons and other supplies, and so the Arabs, basically OPEC put an embargo on exporting any more oil. So all of a sudden the U.S. was very short of oil because we imported a lot back then, and so the cost subsequently went up, and you had things like you could only gas up your car on certain days of the week, like odd numbered license plates on one day and even the next. So basically you had, demand stayed the same, but the supply dropped dramatically, and so supply-demand curves, the price went up pretty dramatically.
The crisis has shattered business confidence. Wall Street has slumped. Economists are forecasting the biggest recession since the Great Depression. Already people are being laid off and firms are going on short time.
So that is a great example of a supply shock that triggered inflation. Okay, now we have a decent idea of what inflation is and what causes inflation. But Kate, who determines the rate of inflation? Like, how is inflation calculated? Is there like an inflation czar?
This question is above my pay grade.
If you were to ask Dave, he would mention the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI.
So CPI is kind of the main measure of inflation right now. It's probably not perfect, because I don't know that there is a perfect measure of inflation, but that's basically, it's usually measured on a year-over-year basis.
Basically, the Bureau of Labor Statistics gathers a bunch of data from a bunch of different sources. It's what they call a basket of goods. Things like food prices, housing prices, and transportation prices. They use all that data and track the rise in consumer goods, and that gives us the Consumer Price Index, the CPI. And Kate, do you want to take a guess at when the U.S. government first tried to measure the rising cost of goods? When did they first start the CPI? How early do you think? Give me a year.
Oh man. Like the 1920s?
Wow, okay. Well, the federal
You
government...
sound surprised.
I know. The federal government did its first survey of rising food prices way back in 1888. The Consumer Price Index, as we know it today, was formed in 1917. So you were very close. You're off by about 3 years. Really, really good. And how is this inflation measurement tool actually used?
Well, in theory, the CPI is supposed to be kind of a measure of cost of living. And again, it's not perfect. If you just think about, the cost of living here in Indianapolis versus the cost of living in San Fran or New York, obviously very different.
The federal government even uses a CPI when it comes to calculating certain benefits.
For example, that's being used to increase Social Security benefits for next year. I think it's 5.9% they're going up because the CPI has gone up roughly that much year over year.
Now, Dave maintains that using the CPI to measure inflation isn't a perfect tool by any stretch.
But it's probably the best we have. I mean, unless you come out with various regional CPIs, which gets obviously very messy.
So yes, coming up with a different CPI for each state or region would be quite messy. But once the federal government has this number, the CPI, Kate, what is it used for?
Well, as Dave said, it's used to calculate Social Security benefits.
Exactly. Social Security benefits and payments. And many employers use it to factor in a cost of living adjustments for salaries for their staff. So a lot of people, in theory, should be expecting this year a 5, 6, 7% increase in their salaries, maybe because that's what the CPI is right now.
If you didn't receive that, you should go back to your boss. You should get back to the bargaining table and use inflation as a negotiating chip. Because
everything you're buying this year is costing 7% more, like your Target bill, than it did last year. Well, what if instead of a 7% inflation rate, what if your goods next year and everything you purchase cost you 16%?
16% more?
Every year.
No thanks.
On everything you purchased.
No. I would purchase less items, I think.
What if that same receipt, those same goods next year cost you 557% more?
That Target run was not what I would call essentials, so I probably wouldn't be making that Target run.
Everything you purchase, bread, milk, hops for first dates, everything, 557% more. That's exactly what happened to people going on first dates in Zimbabwe.
I'd be going on 500% less first dates.
That's exactly what happened to people in Zimbabwe over the last 20 years. Kate, it got so bad, the government of Zimbabwe printed a $100 billion bill and a $10 trillion banknote.
I've always wanted to be a billionaire.
Dave explained to me how it got so bad.
Yeah, it was a couple things. I mean, the government really, when they first became their own independent nation.
Zimbabwe became an independent nation in 1980.
They actually followed a policy of fiscal austerity, not austerity, but responsibility, I should say. And then after Mugabe took over, they gradually, maybe not so gradually, they got away from that. So there was a lot of government spending, which kind of started to drive inflation up. And then they had the big plan to basically confiscate land and redistribute it to the people. And those two things really, I would say, lowered confidence in the system. And so as a result, Zimbabwe's currency fell pretty dramatically against other currencies, which basically means anything you import becomes a lot more expensive. And so that drives inflation up. And then subsequently, when they did the land redistribution campaign, it was A, not handled very well, and B, they had some very bad outcomes in terms of the productivity of the agriculture dropped dramatically. So all of a sudden you added a supply shock to that because you've got less food. And so again, demand stable, supply down, prices go up.
So Kate, Dave just described a perfect storm for inflation. A supply shock, the government prints too much money, and then prices start to rise rapidly. This is what we call hyperinflation. Obviously, an inflation rate of 557% makes our current rate of 7% seem kind of weak, right?
Agree.
But here's my biggest concern. Could something like that, 557%, happen here in the United States? I mean, we already have the right conditions, right? A supply shock caused by COVID and the supply chain issues we keep hearing about. The Federal Reserve is printing more money. Prices are increasing. Am I really about to need a $100 trillion note just to buy some groceries or a new car? Could something like that really happen here in the U.S.?
I would say yes. Just in my experience, never say never.
Right.
Do I think it's likely? No, I think it's highly unlikely. But there's nothing magical about the U.S. that means that if we don't follow horrible policies, we won't get horrible results.
So we seem to be pretty far from Zimbabwe levels of inflation, but that doesn't mean our current inflation rate isn't impacting people right here today.
Make It Make Sense is brought to you by Bedel Financial Consulting. Fee-only, comprehensive wealth management for all generations. Trust Bedel.
We've been training our dogs not to bark because it's a better experience for the patrons. There you go. There you go.
That's what I know. Kate, that voice you hear, not the barking one, is David Horth. He's the CEO of Indy Humane, a central Indiana animal shelter that's been around since 1905. And as you might expect, even an organization like Indy Humane has been seeing some impact from the recent hike in inflation.
The biggest challenge we've had with inflation has been with our payroll and our salaries. A portion of that was we just had to catch up with reality. But another portion was inflation and the change, the cultural change in what people are willing to work for and whether they want to work or not. And we're all going through that as a new normal is being born. We're experiencing that same new normal. So we, several months ago, raised our salaries and our wages quite significantly. Our minimum wage at Indy Humane is now $15 an hour, and then it goes up from there. We try to pay, we absolutely do pay people enough to earn a living. And that has been our biggest single increase that I would attribute to inflationary.
So where you and I might be worried about our grocery bill going up by 6 or 7%, Indy Humane has to tackle inflation of employee salaries. And this is something we have seen across the board in the last couple of years. Employers are having to raise wages to keep up with inflation and to retain employees because podcast hosts like you are telling people to go out and ask for 7% raises.
Guilty as charged.
Defend yourself.
Guilty as charged.
Now, most of what Indy Humane uses to treat rehabilitate, and house their animals is through donations from the general public. I asked David Horth if he thought inflation was having an impact on those donations.
No, because our donations have been going up consistently now. Would they have been going up more without inflation? Hard to say. Difficult to say. But they definitely have not gone down. So I don't think inflation has really impacted how people give to us. And when the pandemic hit hard and heavy in 2020, people were very, very generous and sent in extra donations and large donations. So we were very grateful for that.
That's actually surprising to me.
It's surprising that donations from the general public have been going up.
Yeah.
So what about the cost of dog food? Because I know I've seen the price of my dog's food go up sharply in the last year. But David tells me that Indy Humane is fortunate enough to have a dog food company donate dog food and cat food to the organization. So even though the price of dog and cat food has gone through the roof,
but it has not impacted us because ours is donated. We do buy a certain amount of food on the rare occasions when we don't receive adequate shipments, which almost never happens, or if there's a specialty food, certainly a food that is medicinal for a sick animal, we buy that food and absorb those inflationary costs. Same is true with our medicines. Our medicines are not donated, but they're heavily, heavily discounted. And yes, we've had inflation in those prices, but they're sold to us at such a heavy discount that it hasn't had a significant impact.
So with the generosity of the community, Indy Humane is able to deflect some of the impacts of inflation. David says along with the hike in payroll expenses, the organization does have to deal with other common inflationary impacts like higher gas prices for their fleet of vans. Even if you aren't the CEO of a nonprofit, Dave Crossman says that you too are probably feeling the crunch of inflation.
It depends. I mean, basically, if inflation is going up 6% per year, that means every year a dollar will buy, 6% less than it bought the year before. I mean, over the long term, you think about like the price of a candy bar when you were a kid, it was probably a quarter or something like that. Now it's closer to $1. So your $1 buys a lot less than it used to. And that's kind of what happens. I mean, unless you are getting wage increases that are at or above inflation, you're basically losing purchasing power.
Because, Kate, back when you were a kid, candy bars were a quarter, right?
I'm pretty young for those listening, so no.
It was not a quarter. Believe it or not, the federal government is actually okay with inflation going up each year. Not as much as 6%, but they do set a target.
For a while, it was 2% per year, and now it's 2% on average.
And even though most people are not comfortable with our inflation rate right now, Dave says that some people actually may be benefiting from 6 to 7% inflation.
I mean, if you're a debtor, you're probably benefiting. If you have a mortgage at 3% and costs are going up 6%, you're kind of making out okay. Basically, you're paying back that mortgage over time, and dollars are worth less and less. And if you're an exporter, inflation helps you because you're basically assuming you're selling to countries that are whose inflation is less than yours. You're getting basically stronger currencies back, or more of them.
Obviously, a steady inflation rate of 7 to 8% is not sustainable, right? You don't want to pay that much every single year. More and more are going to Target for state clothes.
That's right.
So
okay.
I asked Dave Crossman what he would do if he were in charge of the Federal Reserve.
I would be looking to raise rates more quickly than Powell is.
Interest rates.
Interest rates, yeah.
Dave would raise rates if he were in charge of the Federal Reserve. And I asked Dave, if it's that easy, just raise rates. Why didn't the Federal Reserve just raise rates?
Well, I think the concern is they don't want to hurt the economy. But I don't see, given how low rates are, I don't see that as really hurting the economy. If we're going from 0 to 0.25% to 0.25 to 0.5%, I don't think that drives a lot of people to suddenly stop spending because they're worried about, the economy crashing.
Strangely enough, Kate, this is kind of what the federal government did back in the 1970s with that oil embargo we talked about earlier to pull itself out of that inflation mess?
Well, they basically sacrificed the economy for the sake of bringing rates down. So Paul Volcker acted very dramatically. He was the Fed chair at the time and raised interest rates pretty dramatically. And that did hurt the economy in the short run. We had the recession of, I think it was 81, 82 or so, something like that, 80, 82, somewhere in there. Basically got interest rates, got inflation tamed, and then started to lower rates.
Finally, Kate, I asked Dave what he thought the inflation rate would be 1 year from now. What do you think he said?
5%?
5%. Is that your guess? Is 5%?
I thought you were saying I was right. Yeah, my guess is Dave said 5.
I'm hoping 6. Frankly, I could see it going either way. We're kind of, in a lot of ways, we're kind of through the looking glass here. We've never been in this situation before, which makes it interesting and scary at the same time.
Interesting and scary indeed. So as Dave Crossman keeps an eye out on the inflation rate, and David Horth keeps an eye on his animals at Indy Humane, we'll keep trying to make it make sense.
Make It Make Sense is hosted by Kate Arndt and Chris Wakefield. It is produced by Bedel Financial and recorded at IBJ headquarters in Indianapolis, Indiana. The graphics are by the lovely Amy House. And for show notes and financial news and information, visit bedelfinancial.com/podcast.